So we're going to kick off this afternoon's concurrent session. Welcome, please take a seat. And I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Doris Dippold. Now, Doris is working with the University of Surrey, and she's a senior lecturer in intercultural relations. She's going to introduce herself in sort of more detail than me, but from the British Council's perspective, we're very happy that Doris is conducting research into this is the student transition from EAP preparation classes into disciplinary study, specifically focusing on oracy and spoken skills. So that's our special interest in Doris. Could you join me in welcoming her to the conference?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon. Okay, good. So as Simon said, I will try to introduce myself, but then as it always goes, when I looked at this morning, I thought, there's so many things I haven't said, which are actually quite important. So I've got a PhD in second language acquisition, so I've always had an interest in language learning. I'm now senior lecturer in intercultural communication, and I'm leading a program focusing on this. I'm leading a master's program at the University of Surrey, which is called Communication and International Marketing. And the last thing I maybe talk about, and might talk about later. What I didn't put on those slides, though, is what I am not. And what I'm not, which may be surprising, given that I'm holding a British Council grant and I'm here now talking about supporting students with languages. I'm not an English language teacher. I mean, I've taught English language like for sort of a little bit once, 18 years ago, but I'm not an English language teacher. However, what I do have, and what I've had throughout my career, when I did work as a language teacher before, as for German, I've always had an interest in the spoken language, never in the writing as much. I've always had an interest in the spoken language. This is how this research that I'm going to talk about, but also the issues that I would like to talk to you about. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Today, where these emerge from interest in spoken language, and when we look a little bit at the EAP literature, the published literature, speaking is often a little bit neglected as compared to writing. Much more research is done from what we can gather on writing rather than speaking. So that's the focus of this presentation. So the big question essentially for this afternoon, for this hour that you're going to be with me, is how can we support students to develop the speaking skills required for academic study in the disciplines, in this EMI context. Now, I know most of you are, as we gathered on the table that I was sitting earlier on, working in EMI context in this wider region. Now, you may be wondering now, why is somebody from the UK who doesn't actually work in EMI speaking about EMI? Well, I consider myself working in EMI because on my master's program, that master's in communication international marketing, the vast majority of the students that we're teaching on this program are international students. There's sometimes one or two UK students, so all non-native speakers. And what we observe in practice is a lot of the issues that we talked about this morning apply in the same way to my EMI environment than to yours. Yeah? So that's hence I define this also as EMI. But okay, let's start with the session. And as I always talk to my students, that I don't like lecturing. I mean, I don't mind lecturing, but I like to be interactive. Students in my class have to speak, and I'm afraid you will have to as well this afternoon. So I will start with two discussion questions, really, and the same as I would do in my classes, I'll give you 2-3 minutes to discuss between you first. For each question, so first question is, think about your EMI context. If you're teaching yourself in a discipline, or if you are supporting teaching as an EAP, English for Academic Purposes lecture, or whatever you're doing, or whether you're involved in policy or whatever. What English-speaking practices do HE students need to engage in when immersed in an EMI curriculum? By practices, I mean things such as presentations. They may have to give a presentation in English. But I want to think a little bit beyond the obvious. Presentations are the obvious, that's why I put it on. So now think about the non-obvious. Yeah? Think about everything. So get together in pairs with me, so however you want to group yourself, I don't mind, I'm not going to be too directive. Have a quick discussion amongst yourself and try to come up with a list. And Simon will be so kind and write down what you're saying. And I can put this on the slides then later on, so because the slides that we publish then have all of this on there. Yep. Okay? Right, about 2-3 minutes. Okay, everybody, hello. Okay, we will go around now. We'll go around now with the microphone. So if you've got any ideas, just, I guess, raise your hand and we'll go around to gather them up. Okay, anybody?
With our group, we came to one discussion, debates.
Discussion, debates, yeah.
Yes,
absolutely.
And role plays. Sometimes they have to do the role plays, and
okay.
they can also make special speeches.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Asking questions.
Okay.
Interviews.
Yeah, okay. Oh.
Okay, after our discussion, that we consider case study is proper because there can be task-oriented cases for solving, and then we have to tell the result by speaking or by giving the presentation on specific cases. And also we would like to implement the interview methods to have an interview on some topics.
Okay.
Because in the upcoming My Teaching lesson, the students will be put into pairs to interview each other.
Oh, okay, very good.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, interviews, good, very good.
We've talked about writing,
Uh-huh.
different kind of writing,
Okay.
and also information processing for different purposes.
Okay, information processing for when you speak, when you have a discussion, or when you...
For writing as well,
okay.
and for searching the information, analyzing the information,
Okay, yeah.
collecting the data from the researchers, from different sources.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Do you want to?
Yeah, well, asking and answering a question. Did we have that already? I'm not sure.
Yes, not explicitly, but I think it's a good one. Asking, answering questions with the lecturer, but also from other students in the seminar group or in a class possibly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry, just wait for the microphone.
Arguing, giving reasons for the ideas. And also making explanations and comparisons.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's at the core of academic study, really giving reasons, arguing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And also comprehension check when students explain back what they just heard, and we can check what they understood.
Yeah, comprehension checks, important. Also comprehension checks to the teacher. Have I understood this correctly? And so on, yeah, good, yeah. Now, when they do all this speaking, in the presentations, in the discussions, in the whatever, when they do this, which sub-skills, I have to stay here, which sub-skills do students have to draw on to be successful in these practices? So I put one on, and that is intelligible pronunciation. And I've very purposefully not put native speaker-like pronunciation on, intelligible pronunciation. But think about all the other things. What other sub-skills do they need to have to be successful in these practices? And I have 2 or 3 minutes. Put your heads together. Right, okay. So, yes, oh, somebody's waving back there. So, someone back there, please. Yeah, it's coming your way. Okay.
First, we need critical thinking.
Critical thinking, okay.
Yes,
yeah.
and working in a group. That's a necessary skill.
Okay.
Then taking.
Turn taking, good, yeah.
And under speaking sub-skills, justifying, negotiating, analyzing, reasoning, and the most important is time management. Not to speak too much.
Okay, yes, okay, absolutely.
We would probably add the language accuracy,
Accuracy.
yeah, and the language cohesion,
Uh-huh.
and so collaboration sometimes with other speakers.
Absolutely.
Well, sometimes for the presentation we have to keep in mind the body language, eye contact, and creativity sometimes.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay.
We also need a listening skill
Mm-hmm.
plus subject-related knowledge.
Okay. Okay, so there's no problem.
I think that we should add here voice projection, intonation,
Yeah.
articulation,
Yeah.
then fluency of speech, grammar, and others have been mentioned already,
Yeah.
other skills.
Absolutely. Okay. Register, yeah, academic register, yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming up with all those lists. There's a reason why I did that. In particular, the second list. What I wanted to introduce to you this morning is a framework. It's a framework for thinking about oracy, about speaking, academic speaking in particular. So, what is oracy? Oracy describes, in very general terms, speaking and listening versus literacy, writing and reading. Writing and reading. Yeah. So, very generally, a focus on speaking and listening. And what I will introduce on the next few slides is the so-called oracy skills framework. I think the last slide has the full reference. It was developed by these three people from the University of Cambridge. Now, it has to be said, this framework was originally developed for use in schools, secondary education in the UK. However, me and my colleague are working at the moment on a few projects. So one of this is the British Council project we're working on, and we're working individually on some other smaller projects of trying to transport this oracy framework into higher education, and actually thinking about also how it may have to be amended for higher education. Yeah? The oracy skills framework draws on theories of communicative competence. So if you are a linguist or if you are from second language learning, teaching, you're familiar with these models of communicative competence, starting from Himes and then all these the other modules that sort of arose from there. So it's very much based on these, draws on these. And it just describes and reflects skills required for effective spoken communication in the range of communicative events. And what it does is it offers a common language to talk about academic speaking. It offers a terminology. I have to say, I was recently not really aware of what much of a need there is. Now, I come from a language teaching background, as I said. Oracy has always been part of my world. It's just it's something so self-evident I don't even have to think about oracy and all the things you've just said. But I recently gave a presentation about oracy to academic colleagues from other schools and departments within the university. They were from law, they were from business, they were from ever. And for many of them, a lot of these things, they kind of knew about them, but they couldn't quite, as we say in English, put their finger on it. They couldn't quite describe it, put a label to it, have the terminology for it. And that's why I've got that here. It offers a common language to talk about academic speaking. So let me show you the framework. Here you will not be able to see the detail, but I'll get into the detail of the different categories in a minute. So the oracy skills framework has, as you see, has got 4 categories. One is physical, then we've got linguistic, cognitive, and social and emotional. That's the 4 different categories, and let's talk about each of these now. So don't have to take a picture of the big one because they're all there, okay? And you'll get the slides anyway, I believe. So the physical dimension in the framework describes voice, issues of voice, for example, projection, pronunciation, and so on, and issues of body language. Somebody mentioned body language, yeah? Don't look at your slides, yeah? and things like that, yeah? So physical skills, language production. speaking too silently. Yeah. Okay, right projection. Okay. Okay, then we have got the linguistic dimension. So that dimension includes what some of you mentioned, vocabulary. So this could be an academic vocabulary, but also could be, I ask my students each year to do a sort of kind of a consultancy project, and they have to present on this then. In that case, they actually have to think about presenting this in non-academic language because it's geared towards a more general audience, and many of them then struggle with that because they've sort of started thinking about these concepts in academic terms, and then suddenly they have to think about them sort of non-academically, well, not non-academically, but they have to think about transferring them to a general audience. Yeah, so vocabulary and register. Register, it's described as language variety. I think we could probably also say register for what sort of language variety are you using, what register are you using. Then structure, how do we structure language? How do you build on it? How do you build on ideas? Now, structure, I would argue, actually, this could also belong to the next category. So some of these categories in the oracy framework are somewhat overlapping and could be argued to be shifted between the two. But let's leave structure here, it's here anyway. And then use of rhetorical devices, for example, in a presentation or whatever, rhetorical question, whatever, anything that makes things rounded. So that's the linguistic dimension. The third one is concerned with the cognitive dimension. So that is about the content, the choice of content. Then you mentioned a lot of these things, so clarifying and summarizing. So summarizing, digesting information for others. Self-regulation, that includes things such as timekeeping. I've sat through many student presentations of 15 minutes, where after 15 minutes I had to go. I've sat through one student presentation where after so many the students wouldn't stop speaking. So timekeeping for self-regulation. But also, for example, when working in a group, self-regulation of not dominating the others, yeah? Knowing when somebody else wants to speak. Reasoning, yeah, academic speaking, obviously very important. Reasoning, building an argument, supporting it, and so on. And audience awareness. Again, audience awareness in terms of how much does my audience already know about this subject? How much vocabulary do they already have in this subject? What's new to them? And so on. Audience awareness. So that's the content dimension. The cognitive dimension. And then the last one, the social and emotional dimension. And a few of you mentioned that, as they mentioned group work and they mentioned working together. And that's very much this one. So working with others, listening and responding to others. Confidence is mentioned here, confidence in speaking as well. So, as I said earlier on, I'm a program director for a master's program, and I've been program director for another master's previously. And I had a situation a few years ago when a student knocked at my door and started sort of complaining about group work they had to do for one of their modules. And the student, he dominates and doesn't ever listen to what I'm saying and so on. No. Okay, so calm them down. Okay, left. 10 minutes later, the next knock on the door was another student from that same group saying, I never get to speak, and that was the other way around. He said, the other student never speaks, they never contribute, and so on and so forth. So very much the social emotional domain here of working together and being actually self-aware of how you speak and whether you dominate the discussion or whether, how to involve the others and so on. Yeah, very important, the social emotional domain. Okay. So that's oracy. What I would like you to do now is talk a little bit about. Anyway, maybe before I talk about that, do you have any questions or comments at all on oracy, on that framework? Any questions or comments that I may be able to answer or not? No? Okay, then I'll move on. So what I would like to do now is to talk a little bit about oracy in EMI and to talk about the findings from the British Council project that me and a colleague in the UK, and actually also colleagues in countries outside the UK, are currently involved in. So, just to explain what the aims of this project are. We set out to investigate how students transition from pre-sessional EAP courses into the disciplines can be supported. Now, just to explain audience awareness, the word pre-sessional, because it may not be familiar to everybody. In the UK, pre-sessionals are the courses that students do when they don't have the required. They have to normally, to be admitted to a master's degree, they have to do the IELTS test and have a 6 or 6.5 depending on the course. Now, some students don't achieve this before they start, and then they do a summer pre-sessional course where for 2 or 3 months they come to the university before they start and do an EAP course, and then they have an exam at the end. If they pass the exam, then they can be admitted to the degree course. So this is for the UK. However, we also have non-UK contexts here where the EAP, the pre-sessionals were semester-long courses. So a full semester of EAP study before starting into starting degree study. Yeah. So that's what's meant by pre-sessional. And we wanted to investigate how students transition from that environment of EAP, pre-sessional, into the actual disciplines, disciplinary study. And we, in doing that, we wanted to very much triangulate our study. So we wanted to have student, disciplinary teacher, and EAP teacher perspectives on the oracy skills required to be effective in disciplinary studies. So you want to say, what do students think of what skills are required to be effective? But we also wanted to see what do EAP teachers think about the very same skills, or disciplinary teachers, and whether there's a gap between the perceptions of what's important and what's not between these three groups. So what we did, we have 4 universities that are taking part in this project. So there is 2 UK universities. I call it Anglophone EMI. I will argue that it is also EMI because we think in many it is. So it's my university, University of Surrey, and then almost just down the road, the University of Southampton, which works with this model of summer pre-sessionals, and then you start your disciplinary study. And we had 2 non-Anglophone EMI. We had Bilkent University in Turkey and Sayed University in Dublin, which work with this, which are working with this model of semester-long pre-sessionals. Yeah? So these are the participating universities. And we wanted to show you some key findings. And as I said earlier on, we wanted to find out where are the perceptions of students and tutors different in terms of the weightings of these skills. Now, going back to the oracy framework, let me just actually put it up here. In the survey, so we did a survey with them, a mostly quantitative survey, where we just asked students about the importance of these sort of different aspects of the oracy skills framework. So we code them slightly differently because we thought physical may not be that understandable to them. So we called the physical, we called them delivery skills. Then we had linguistic, we had language skills. Then we had the cognitive, organizing ideas, and social skills, the social emotional. So we, just for the survey, we called these a little bit differently, so just to make that clear here. And we found really big differences between how the different groups weigh the importance of these skills. So, for example, let's talk about language skills. The students sort of how language is really, really important. Yeah, accuracy and so on and so forth. The disciplinary tutors, accuracy is not important. Yeah, the disciplinary tutors focused very much. The disciplinary tutors focused on the delivery skills. Yeah, so they focus a little bit more on the organizing ideas. So that's one of the big differences here. Then the social skills. The students thought that was very, very important. Disciplinary tutors didn't quite see it that way, or it wasn't really on the forefront of their mind.
Can I just ask, are they reflecting on the skills themselves?
Yeah, yes, they are. Yeah. Okay, so there were really different perceptions on what is important in terms of oracy.
I'm very sorry. The students were speaking about each of them was speaking about their own skills or the skills of the teacher.
No, they talk about the importance of these skills for successful study. Yeah, so it's like how important are these? Yeah, how important are these different dimensions for successful EMI studies, actually? Yeah. Okay. So just to summarize a few bits. So in the specific sub-skills, correct pronunciation and correct grammar was considered important by students, but not so much by tutors and EAP tutors. Asking questions in class was considered much more important by disciplinary. So this is actually, so I should actually mention that this is not much about the sub-skills. This is more about what we had on your first discussion. This is more about these 2 bullet points are more about the kind of the practices here. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. So we also asked them about the practices that they engage in EMI, and which practices are really important to be successful in EMI study. So in terms of practices, the disciplinary tutors and EAP tutors said, it's really important that students are able to ask questions in class. Students didn't really think about having to ask questions in class. They didn't consider that very, it wasn't on the forefront of their mind. Then this one was a kind, well, not necessarily a surprise, but it was something, it was a bit of a surprise. Communicating with tutors outside of class. Now the disciplinary tutors, the tutors in the academic discipline said that's really important. The student needs to be able to come to me in the office hours, ask questions, engage with me, and so on. Whereas again, the students and also the EAP tutors didn't consider that too important. And then going back to the oracy skills framework, confidence, the students rated that as very important, but the disciplinary and EAP tutors not. So there's just some of the key differences between those 3 groups. Now, why is this important? It was kind of pointed out this morning that all the kind of different cogs have to work together to make EMI successful. But if everybody is not on the same page with regards to these things, then that may not work. And there is big differences between those. Now, I have to say also in terms of methodology, at the moment in our analysis, we've not really distinguished by institution. We have not even distinguished by Anglophone EMI and by non-Anglophone EMI because there is not much we didn't find any large-scale differences between these 2 different settings anyway. Yeah. Then we also asked students. So we had questionnaires, but we also had interviews. So we interviewed the students, and we asked them how well do you feel supported, prepared for disciplinary studies through the processional? So how well has your EAP study, your processional EAP course, prepared you for the discipline? Because in the UK, they finish their EAP, their processional, then they have 2 weeks of break, and then they're thrown into deep end, into the discipline. So how well has this prepared you? So, positive, they said. Positive was vocabulary development. They really tried to develop my vocabulary. There was a lot of formative feedback in the EAP class, a lot of feedback. There were very supportive tutors. And also in the classes, in these pre-session classes, there was an English-only policy, so we're able to only speak English, or we're allowed to only speak English. But they also mentioned the negative. They actually said, well, we need multilingual classes. And what they mean by that is that in the UK at least, a lot of these pre-sessionals are predominantly Asian students, and amongst those predominantly Chinese students. It's just the way it is at the moment in terms of what countries we're hiring students from. And said, well, actually in the pre-sessional, we're still in our little enclave. Yeah, everybody has the same problems. Everybody. Sorry, so is my session? Yeah, no, okay, sorry. Okay, oh, okay. Okay, fine. Yeah, okay. Okay, so they said, in my pre-session, everybody has the same problems. Everybody has the same issues, but it's a bit of an enclave. And I know it's not the same thing as when I'm actually thrown into the disciplines. Yeah. Then they said, and that again, in terms of the focus of the project, they said actually the focus was much more on writing, not enough on speaking, not enough speaking activities. And a lot of them said, actually, I don't really feel ready for disciplinary studies. I kind of, I'm readier than I was maybe, but not really ready. And they also talked a little bit about these exams in the end. So you have to pass the exam to get to the disciplines, and the exam was very much considered a gatekeeper. I have to pass the exam, then I'm in. Yeah. Okay. And just very briefly, the last key finding here. According to students, which factors facilitate and limit progression? Because we interviewed the students twice. We interviewed them in the UK even 3 times. We interviewed them just after the pre-sessional, then at the end of semester 1, the end of semester 2, and in Dubai and Dubai and Turkey, we interviewed them twice. So we had a sort of developmental view, if you will. They said speaking to native speakers and classmates really helped develop my English. Then self-improvement efforts, desire to be fluent, interest in the subject, fondness for English presentation, practice and basic preparation. But the last one was interesting. It was so often it came out in the interviews, being understood. I feel good about myself when somebody shows me I'm understood. Yeah? So that was a really strong theme in that analysis. Then the limiting factors were a fear of mistakes, lack of confidence, fear of native speakers, because again, think about that very protective environment, and you're thrown into the lion's den from that. Then they also said, yes, okay, there was a vocabulary preparation, my vocabulary is definitely developed, but when they actually go into the disciplines, then they realize that actually there's still quite a lack of academic vocabulary. Again, the lack of multilingual classmates was mentioned again, because that was probably stronger in the UK data. In many courses, they go into business studies, and they are still 90% Asian or Chinese. So the lack of interaction with students from other first languages. Lack of speaking activities in courses, the general burden of studies, and the struggle also in listening. Listening came out as quite a strong theme of facilitating speaking. And if they struggle to listen, you can't learn to speak. So these are the key findings of the project. And I'm actually going to skip the recommendations now, and you can see them on the when you get the slides. But I wanted to end with another little discussion. So this is 3 questions here, and I'll let you discuss amongst yourselves again. So the first point is, how can oracy be developed in EMI settings in your country or your institution, in your context? What opportunities and constraints do existing curricula and policy decisions present for developing oracy? So what limits, what prevents you from doing so in a way? And is there any good practice you're willing to share? Any exercises, activities that you do that you're willing to share? The reason I'm asking this last question is the following. we are currently preparing a good practice guide for the British Council based on this project. And as part of that, in a few weeks' time in Surrey, we'll have a day workshop, which is basically a longer version of what I did with you today. And we want to invite practitioners to submit ideas, practical ideas for supporting oracy for that good practice guide. Now, I would like to invite you to do the same. If you've got any activities, exercises that you have already done in your groups, in your classes to develop oracy, please email them to me so we can include this, obviously with all credit to you, in the good practice guide. Yeah, so please free to email it to me and until, well, I think about early December or so, and then we need to put the guide together. Okay, so that's a reason I asked this last question, but really, so we've got, oops, so that's the reference to the oracy skills framework and the link. But just briefly, 3 minutes again, try to discuss the questions amongst yourself, and we'll have a quick concluding discussion. As we're running out of time, can I please have your ideas about any of these points, really? We're not going in order, any of these points. Who would like to make a start? Yes, okay.
It's our common idea. So the first proposition is distribution of learners according to their language skills and study in smaller groups. The second proposition is the academic support from the teacher, which is needed for the weaker learners, because often people with poor language skills are shy to talk and to communicate, to participate in a learning process. Probably considering the curriculum, it could be less lectures and more seminars, and using active learning techniques.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay. So we would suggest the curriculum design.
Mm-hmm.
So it should be more student-oriented,
Mm-hmm.
and also there could be some incentives for teachers or for those who are good at structuring for the course. Because in my university, we have the bonus or financial support for those who make a good contribution for this design.
Okay. Oh, well, okay. I would like to work for your university. My university has, so this is UK university, has recently developed new, they call them grade descriptors. So they lay out what does it mean to have a first-class degree, a second-class degree, and so on. And they described it. When these were sent around in, for me, sort of in July. And I looked at them, I was like, there's nothing about oracy. And I complained. I've achieved something, or me and my colleague actually have achieved something, and that the university has asked us to help develop these criteria. We'll do this during the course of the next year. But we have sent around, actually, the digested version of the oracy framework has just been circulated to all academics at the university to actually help them assess these skills. And the session that I told you earlier about that I gave for academics a few weeks ago was very much that. And a lot of them didn't know exactly that, how to actually assess oracy. Yeah. So, no, absolutely agree. Mm. Sorry? Yes, yeah. Now? Yes, I can. Yes, yeah. Okay.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. We were discussing that EMI setting is not for teaching English, right? The focus is not on teaching or improving English skills, and the teachers should not focus on it. But I think that improving English can be a side effect for EMI setting, because when they read literature in English, when they participate in some workshops, discussions, this way or that, they improve their English. But should we include it in the curriculum or course guides?
Well, this is an interesting one. This is a question. I don't think I can answer that. I mean, we generally, out of this project and out of our experience, we would recommend a much closer, at least a much closer collaboration between disciplinary teachers and EAP teachers. Now, when we asked teachers, the teachers that in our study we interviewed also commented on this issue. Should we support English? And we have two polls. We have some, which my colleague described as an English expression, not in my backyard. They say, so, no, I'm a teacher. We have got a quote, actually, I'm a teacher of law. I don't teach English. And then we had others. They were in the disciplines. There were business studies and so on. Now they do teach their subjects, but they do things in class that just scaffold and support students who don't have English as their first language. So they don't teach English as such, but they're aware of the difficulties that they have. So I mean, I feel there needs to be much closer collaboration, whether this is in the UK or not in the UK. But you will have different perceptions of the, and many teachers in this don't know how to support students. So. Absolutely.
Not the AP teachers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my answer to this question as well. I think oracy is not a problem only in English.
Yeah.
I think oracy is a problem of all content teachers, maybe some English teachers, because even when teachers teach their subjects in Uzbek or Russian, students do not have an opportunity to share their ideas. They don't know how, most of the soft skills which were listed earlier, like presentation skills, sharing ideas, critical thinking, all these are ignored. And probably the first thing what we can do is train our teachers how to do more speaking or discussion.
Absolutely. I mean, this starts with teacher training. I so often sit in presentations by the vice chancellors and so ever and score them on the oracy framework. Where I think actually teachers and whoever needs more often need more training this themselves. Absolutely.
And as soon as they would solve this problem, our students usually do not have too much problem with English. They have more problems with all these kind of
Absolutely. Okay,
to raise the discussion, the strategy of asking high order thinking questions is very important, and we can raise discussion and easier. Of high order thinking.
Okay, so
we also have a good practice, that is, it's when the teacher is participating in the job interview, the first job interview of the graduates. We actually go with our students. Yes, and help them, and we also help them to prepare. And we also participate in the recruitment campaigns that different companies do inside of our university.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good example. So if you've got anything like that, please do send it to me. If you've got any materials, whatever, we're happy to include that sort of thing as.
This year we're going to organize one more interview. Like we're going to invite these employable companies to get a mock interview, and a real interview. If they can get jobs. It's like an assessment.
Okay,
Good practices that I would like to mention is the method of projects. So it works very well. The students are given tasks and they are going to research or investigate the market and later on present their thoughts, ideas and the data that they have collected. And this is a good way to develop their oars.
Absolutely, so task-based learning, very much so, okay.
Yesterday we had a training with Professor
from Nile and just fresh ideas that we got from them. So as questioning is very important in developing oracy, so Socratic questioning can be used to give, to take more speaking output from students, like questions like the gadfly, the ignoramus, the midwife and stingray. Those things were very new for us, and this can enhance speaking output. Plus, you have mentioned the example that one student was dominating and the other one just didn't have a chance. And the solution to this is talking chips, which our trainer did with us. He gave us all 3 cards with chip talking time. Each time we contributed, we just put it in the middle. And when they finished, we just had to be quiet so that to give a chance to others to talk. Good. So that was an excellent example of
Brilliant.
moderating this or controlling equal contribution.
Okay. Yeah, that would be a good contribution for the good practice guide. That I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Jason.
Okay,
The-
okay.
In terms of idea and contribution to the guide, for discussion, to develop the discussion, sometimes we prepare the exponents, the phrases, and pass the phrase. If you use it, you pass it in circle, you pass to the students who is next to you, and you get another from the neighbor, another student on your right. And so each time you have to use it and to ask for opinion or involve the other opinion or clarify. It depends on the exponents of the phrases you have.
Thank you. Good idea, great idea.
I actually have a question. When the students said that they appreciate being understood, I think that's an extremely important point.
Yeah.
Because as a teacher, it's really quite awkward to have to screw up your face and look at a student who you don't understand.
Yeah.
And it becomes quite embarrassing for the teacher, and also equally awkward for the student.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you went into any more detail about why or under what circumstances they were aware of being understood and not being understood.
No, we haven't. I must say this was not a focus of it. It was just something that was mentioned to us in the interview. So we didn't get into too much detail how they knew about. No, we also didn't do any extra recording of, say, tutorial sessions or anything where we could have got more of that detail. So, but that's probably that could be something to work on in the future. Yeah. No, fair enough.
Well, thank you everyone for your contributions and your attention after a wonderful lunch, and I think we'd all wish to say thank you to Doris for a very thought-provoking presentation. We've now got a quick coffee break, but 3:30 we're all back together in the main hall again.